The question is that the motion be agreed to. Chris Farfoy.
Mr Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for Rotorua for laying down that challenge to listen to the Whitireia Law Centre, which is a very good law centre in Porirua, a law centre that I respect a lot. But I'm not going to meet that challenge. I'm going to throw another challenge back to the member here, because if he really cares about what the Whitireia Law Centre thinks about and the intimidation in our community of Porirua, go and put a decent piece of legislation in this House that will actually be effective to do something about the intimidation of gangs in our communities. Don't bring this window-dressing piece of legislation through to this House, come into this House, challenge me about my constituents and a law centre that I have a duty to, and say that this is going to do something about it, because it's not. It's not going to make one bit of difference to gang intimidation in our communities. So, Mr McLeay, if you want to come to Porirua, let's go and see the Whitireia Law Centre, withdraw this bill from the House, and let's put something that's actually going to be effective in front of this Parliament to deal with the issue of gang insignias and gang intimidation in our communities. If you're truthful about it, let's go and do that and put a piece of decent legislation in front of this House. It's funny because the most passionate part of this bill that's been put back to the Select Committee actually comes from the Labor Party, because we actually say the Labor Party has no truck with gangs, with a culture that promotes, encourages, facilitates or tolerates criminal activity collectively or individual among its members. Well, Mr Speaker, that is 100% right. The member who just took his seat was right. No party in this House has any tolerance for gangs. The intimidation that they do have that they do play in our communities, the criminal activity that they organise and carry out, and the grief that they create in our families and communities. But as I said before, Mr Speaker, this bill goes nowhere near effectively dealing with the problem of gangs in our communities. It fails to deal with a substantial problem. It fails on the test of being clear and consistent to deal with gang problems and why people are joining gangs and why they commit crime. This bill, Mr Speaker, does little or nothing. It does succeed in a few things, though. It succeeds in the National Party. It succeeds in terms of the illusion of tackling crime, which is one of the things that the National Party definitely wants to do. It succeeds in terms of maximum exposure for trying to look like you're doing something with minimum effort. And it certainly succeeds in the National Party looking like they're doing something or being tough on something where there's going to be no practical difference. Mr Speaker, this bill adds nothing to the powers that already exist, and that certainly is the point in case in my electorate of Porirua, and the member said that the Select Committee added police stations onto the list of government premises that are covered under this bill. Mr McLeay, I'll take you out to Porirua right now and I'll show you the entrance to the police station where it says no gang patches allowed in the station. So the police are already taking action to make sure there are no gang patches on their premises. But so why do we need to bring this in? Because the legislation already exists. The legislation already exists to make sure that any intimidatory behaviour is policed. But the problem here is that it's not being enforced. And it's interesting that the police minister is piping up, because it's the police under huge pressure because of the budget cuts that this government has brought in, that they can't police things like this. They cannot police things like this. So the police minister might want to think about why they have to bring in this piece of legislation and the ability of the police to enforce the current laws. And I would have to say that the stretched police resources, we saw yesterday, Radio New Zealand said there were 213 fewer frontline staff, police, on the front line right now than there were in June last year. So the police minister can say whatever she likes over here, because that's a government who said they were going to get tough on law and order and beef up police numbers. But we know that there were 213 fewer police because of the budget pressure that this government has put the police under. Absolute fact, numbers coming from the police minister's own office, own department, that there were fewer police officers on the front line. Black and white. This is the government who says it backs police, but it doesn't, because there were fewer frontline police officers on our front line at the moment. And what's more, because of the budget pressure that the government has put the police under, is there are fewer police trainees going through the police college. They are. Well, I'll table the WPQs I get from roughly, I think in 2011 there were roughly 450 trainees go through Royal Police College, and then last year it was roughly 265. So half the number of police trainees went through the police college in the previous year. And let's have a look at the 10-1 magazines at the moment, because if you look at the 10-1 magazines at the moment, at the back of that magazine they start listing who's left the police force. And I'm sure the police officers that are in this house, Mark Mitchell will be watching that closely, Chester Burrows, a lot of their mates who they know through long-time policing are starting to resign, and the numbers are starting to creep up. So what is going on at the police at the moment where experienced officers like Grant Coward out of New Plymouth say, OK, I've had enough of this place, I'm out of here. 20 years of policing, experienced policing, and this government is letting experienced police officers go, all because that minister is starting to cut the budgets. The truth hurts. The truth hurts that government, and that is exactly what the truth is. Our police are stretched, and this is one of the plethora of things that they can no longer manage to keep an eye on. So why is the government making these cuts, and why is it bringing in this window-dressing piece of legislation? Because, Mr Speaker, nothing good is going to come out of this piece of legislation. Oh, she is. The truth hurts, unfortunately. Let me go back to the bill. Because I did want to acknowledge some of the submitters, and the one that Mr Macleay did mention, because I think they did make a very good submission, and that is the Murupara Area School. They did make 2 points why they did support the bill, and the first one was that children and students didn't want to see gang insignias plastered around their school. They needed to be protected from it, and also that the introduction of a gang insignia into their premises would create tensions and unnecessary negative behaviour, and we want to discourage that type of behaviour from our school. Now, it was a good submission. I'll say it was a good submission, but the message that we sent to that school at the time was, in terms of the opposition members, is that there are laws already in place. There are laws... Oh, I beg your pardon? I was there. Were you there? OK, good. Well, we were both there. Thanks for establishing that. I was there. I listened to it. I actually knew one of the submitters, so just pop down for a second. It was a very good submission in the fact that we said to them, well, there are already laws that exist to make sure that your concerns are already catered for. So, Mr Speaker, this bill certainly doesn't do anything new and won't be effective to make sure that the threat of gang intimidation will be stamped out in our communities. Mr Speaker, there were also a number of anomalies in this bill about who can do what and where. And one of them was that you can wear a gang patch on a government premises, but that doesn't apply to things like that could also be considered offensive, like a swastika. Now, I think that that is a strange anomaly in this bill that I think most people would wonder why can you get away with that, but something highly offensive like a swastika isn't captured in the bill. Or maybe we'll put an SOP. We'll probably put a few SOPs in to get rid of most of the things in this bill. There was also another anomaly around that you could be wearing a gang patch in a covered footpath that was operated by a council or was owned by the government, and that was a no-go area for anyone who was wearing a gang patch. But you could certainly be in an uncovered footpath, and you're fine to be there. And another one, you could be at a bus station or a train station, and that could be covered. That could be a covered building or premises. But then if you were in an uncovered bus station or train station, well, that was a go area. So, Mr Speaker, there are holes in this piece of legislation right through it that mean that on this side of the House we cannot support it. What the government should actually do is take a good look at that a decent piece of legislation, look at what some of the factors are and why some of these youngsters are joining gangs like youth unemployment, which is at a higher level, and maybe just for the benefit of the minister, look at some of the harm that her budget cuts have done with police that are causing some of the issues, so the laws that are currently in place are not being enforced. If this government talks tough on law and order, it should back it up with a budget and some legislation to do that, but it hasn't.
Very good speech.
Jackie Dean.
Mr. Speaker, 10-minute speech